I can't speak for the group. Petzing was off of my radar, and I think I always look at where can I learn, where can I be better, in future situations like this, and really, I didn't look much beyond, kind of what they had done recently, and that was a mistake. Last year, what did you expect from a Cardinals team that was missing their quarterback, was missing their running back, was missing running back 2, missed running back 3 for part of the year, finished the year with 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen on IR for a good chunk, that was missing their number 1 receiver for a long time, was missing their number 2 tight end blocking. I mean, like, that offense was junk last year, and the defense was garbage. I mean, you look at their week by week scoreboard, how often they're giving up 40 points. Like, that changes how you play offense. It changes how you're defended. And so I didn't think to go back and look multiple years at some of these resumes. And Petzing's is pretty impressive, particularly from a run game standpoint. Number 2 in the NFL at yards per carry in 23 and 24. The year that he had his quarterback and had his running back for all 17 games, it was a borderline top 10 offense, still without anywhere near the firepower really that the Lions had. And I've really started today digging into the film and have grown kind of appreciation for what this running game looked like, the creativity of it, the different looks that they had. I thought it was more zone-based. It's not. It's more gap-based. Made James Conner the best that he was in his career. And I can see why, what he was doing was resonating with Dan Campbell.
Yeah, if we're talking initial reactions, I'm with Justin. He was not really on my radar. I think that was probably because he came from, Cardinals team that was 3-14 and, got fired. So I wasn't really, looking at that staff for maybe potential names. But I think as soon as you start to dig into his background and the things that he likes to do, things that he wants to do, things that he's done in his past, you see the fit. And I think that's all you can ask for right now until games are played and these guys line up and, take the field. But in terms of the things that he likes to do stylistically, you look at the under center stuff. You might be, you might see like the 70% rate that they ran in Arizona and say, well, that's way too much. The Lions are hovering around 50, 52% in under center rate versus shotgun rate, 70% what they were doing in Arizona. If you look at what Kyler was doing under Cliff Kingsbury and really Kyler's background in general as a quarterback, I think they're at like 89, almost 90% shotgun rate under Cliff Kingsbury. And that came down to about 71.5% when they took over in Arizona. So, I think what they tried to do is incorporate more of that under center, heavy personnel looks in Arizona for a quarterback like Kyler Murray that wasn't used to doing it. And, in some ways it was working for them. That 2024 season, they did some really good things. They put a lot of good stuff on tape. I remember when the Cardinals played the Lions, Dan Campbell brought up just the things that they were doing and the ways that they're using Kyler. He said, I really like what they're doing with him. I think so much of his game when he was coming out of college was, hey, he's in the gun, put him in the gun. That's what he's done. And you're playing the spread game, which there's nothing wrong with that. But, this unit comes in and the approach is a little bit different. He said they're taking a portion of that, but they're a little bit heavier in the run game with it, 12 personnel, 13 personnel. And the fact that they've incorporated under center with it and the heavy runs with boots off of it, hard action, get him out of the pocket completely, let him see the field. If it's not there, then you can see what he does with his feet. He really liked what they were doing with Kyler Murray specifically in 2024. And maybe it just wasn't a good fit. Kyler has his limitations as a quarterback. And I think what you see with Petzing and his background from Cleveland with Kevin Stefanski and Minnesota with Stefanski and even North Turner when he was there, a lot of under center play action. That's the stuff that the Lions like to do. So, you can look at whatever you want, the numbers from 2025 with the injuries. If you want to evaluate him off that, sure. But I think you have to look at the total picture with a guy like this. And if you're trying to figure out why he was brought in here, that's probably where you start.
Yeah, I feel like if we just remove the name and maybe the lack of cachet from the equation, isn't Petzing basically what the fan base was hoping for in this OC hire? Like, he checks, I feel like, all of the boxes that the fan base had come up with. And, a guy with 3 years of play calling experience, a guy without direct ties to Dan Campbell, and not even within that Sean Payton coaching tree, a young mind at 38 with fresh ideas. And if you look at the way, as you guys have referenced, the way he coordinated that Cardinals team, someone that can reconnect the Lions to their identity as a team that can rush the ball physically, but also creatively. You know, the way they played football when Ben Johnson was here and when their offensive line was elite is in a lot of ways the way that the Cardinals played football in 2023 and 2024 when they had a healthy offensive line and healthy running backs. And I think to me, the first thing that stood out about Petzing as I started looking at his background was just a diverse offensive resume. I think it's something that I mentioned on our pod last week that the Lions would probably value in someone that has coached multiple positions on offense, that isn't just a passing game specialist. In a lot of ways, the ladder that Petzing climbed mirrors the one almost rung for rung that Ben Johnson climbed. Like they spent time in receivers rooms, in quarterbacks rooms, in tight ends rooms, all in the NFL, all with multiple teams. And unlike Morton, who was a self-admitted specialist in the pass game, I think Petzing presents a more complete offensive profile as a coach. And I would think that for Dan Campbell, that was something that definitely was appealing.
I want to go back to some of the shotgun stuff too, and I know Colton was kind of hitting on it, but like that's your personnel you're playing to, and a lot of it actually was pistol, and I think that's kind of the compromise you see with some of these mobile quarterbacks where you want to play more of an under center style, but height limitations or mobility kind of impact they're used to. I think we'll see a pretty big shift to more under center play. Also a ton of third down, 2-minute drill, trailing, like all of that went to full on shotgun for him. So I think, like I said, the defense was really bad and kind of put them in a lot more of those situations where they kind of had to utilize their personnel for it. And so I don't think that's going to carry over at all.
Yeah, I think, and people, to Will's point, when they first saw the name, now, that's where the freak out happened, at least for myself. I mean, I'm a fan. You guys do great work. I'm not you guys. Okay. I'm going to crash out. I'm going to act like an idiot. And then I take a couple days and then I'm going to be like, okay, that's fair. He has play calling experience. He's young and all these things that come into play. I think where people are worried, or I guess what they're thinking of, fans that are concerned is, they're thinking of Dan Campbell of, okay, because Amon Ross St. Brown just said on his podcast today, actually, where he was like, fans, you guys don't trust Dan Campbell. And I think, people are kind of looking at this season as, okay, you just fired John Morton. And by the way, can I just say this before I continue? I'm not even really worried about the offense. I'm more worried about the defense, if I'm being quite frank. Like the offense, I think, is going to be really good either way. But anyway, people are looking at this offensive coordinator hire as, hey, man, if you fire Drew Petzing for whatever reason, or you take away the play calling duties, you're looking at probably, and I know Anthony Lynn, whether you want to count him, that's technically you're kind of one for, 4 total guys that you've brought in. And they're looking at Dan Campbell and how much pressure he's kind of under to kind of get this hire right. And I think also that what goes into that is keeping Calvin Shepard, because he's deciding to keep him. So, you kind of need Calvin to take that next step. But in your guys' eyes, how much pressure is Dan Campbell under? I know Brad Holmes obviously has his own thing that people are looking at him for, but for Dan Campbell this year to kind of get not only the offensive coordinator right, but to Calvin Shepard, for Calvin Shepard to prove him right for keeping him there, just with his staff.
I think you're constantly under pressure, an NFL coach. Like, right, it's always kind of a boiler room, but in terms of job security, I mean, it's still 4 plus 500 seasons. It's still a lot of unprecedented success, and I know that the bar has been elevated, but like also it's like you've forgotten where you came from, and it's still kind of new, it's still kind of novel. There's still kind of navigating this new era of success, and success always isn't linear. And just because you took this first step back doesn't mean we suddenly should be talking about coach and GM jobs. Now, if they take a lateral step or another step back next year, sure, the seat starts getting warm. But again, I still don't think you're talking about jobs at the end of next season.
Yeah, I look at where the Lions are at right now, and they had a down year, but they went 9-8, and a lot of people are going to point to, oh, you finished fourth place, but 4 straight years with a winning record, I don't think that's anything to just kind of write off. I think Dan's done a really good job here, and yeah, he got the hire wrong. I think he'd be the first one to admit that. He moved on quickly after the season ended. He didn't kind of drag it along. He didn't even keep Morton on staff. He realized he made a mistake. He realized that mid-season he made a mistake. That's why he took over play calling. So I think Dan's one to kind of realize when things are going wrong very quickly. Now, if there's going to be pressure, I do agree with Jeff in a way. I think it's probably going to be more on the defensive side, because even with Morton, and I would need to make this clear, the Lions are still top 5 in yards per game and scoring. And I think maybe one of our commenters put this out there too. But like, to be, if that's your floor as an offense, and we're talking about bringing a young guy with new ideas that does what you like to do, assuming they fix the offensive line, because that was obviously an issue as well, when we're talking about this conversation. But if you get back to some of the things that you're doing in years past and you fix it, I'm not worried about this offense. Like, the offense is going to be just fine. Now, if the defense has another down year, and this is year 6 of running the same system or a variation of the system, then it might be time to say, okay, we gotta change some things here, whether it's personnel wise or a coaching change. It doesn't sound like that's happening this year, but maybe in the future if it's still looking pretty rough. So, and injuries are obviously a factor there too. But in terms of Dan's role, I like, with this hire, is there much at stake? Sure, because they're in a Super Bowl window and they have all the talent in the world, and like the expectations should be high for this offense. And Dan, again, would be the first to say that. But I don't see him being on the hot seat even with another relatively down year again next year.
Yeah. The only thing I would say maybe in counter to that is, like, their offensive floor to me this year was drastically lowered. And I think that's reflected in the fact that, you guys know this, they scored fewer than 20 points 5 times this year. And they had only done that 4 times combined the prior 2 years. I think the offensive ceiling is as high as ever for this team. But in order to restore the floor, they have to get back to running the ball, controlling the clock, and exerting pressure on the defense. And in order to do that, I don't care who you hire as OC, you have to go fix this offensive line. I think the simplest way to review this hire, especially with all the emphasis that Petzing clearly places on the run game, is that it will look great if Brad Holmes and the Lions do as they say they will and urgently upgrade the offensive line this offseason. And it might look terrible if they don't. And in that way, I think Brad Holmes will dictate the success of this hire as much as Dan Campbell himself and Drew Petzing himself. But, I do think there's a decent amount at stake here for Campbell. Like, you've already whiffed twice on your 2 external OC hires. And granted, one of them, Anthony Lynn, stepped into a much different roster than the one that John Morton and Petzing now are taking over. But, can you really afford to strike out, to go 0 for 3 in that situation? So if this blows up dramatically, and I don't think it will, it's not impossible to think that Dan Campbell would end up on the hot seat just because of all of the other pieces that are already in place on offense. But to go back to what Petzing does so well, I think a stat that we all know well now, and I referenced this in what I wrote about Petzing yesterday, is that the Lions were held under 100 rushing yards 7 times this season and lost all 7 games. And they had been held under 100 rushing yards just 4 times in the prior 2 seasons combined. And just out of curiosity, I wanted to see how the Cardinals stacked up to that data point when they were at their best. And only the Ravens from 2023 to 2024 were held under 100 rushing yards in fewer games than the Lions. And then the next most stable rushing attacks after that, over that 2-year stretch, were the 49ers, who were held under 106 games, the Eagles at 7 games, and the Bills and Cardinals at 8 games. Like, you could make a pretty strong case that for 2 years, Drew Petzing was coordinating one of the most reliable rushing attacks in the NFL. And over that 2-year stretch, they averaged more yards per carry, 5.2, I think, than every team but Baltimore. Obviously, things fell through this year when they were down to replacements at running back, when they only had their starting O-line for 4 games out of 17. But you can definitely see the vision here and what intrigues Dan about Petzing and the way he designs a run game.
And I would add to that, like, the personnel, right? Like what did you think of James Conner before Drew Petzing got there, right? Like this is a guy that had peak seasons of, he had a 970-yard season early in his career, but 750, 720, 780, kind of leading into that, kind of a very pedestrian average number one back. What of their offensive line is household names? Obviously, they spent a first-round pick on Paris Johnson a couple years back, but it's not a star-studded, Pro Bowl-filled offensive line. Yet their run game success was consistently top 10 in success rate. The yards per carry were obviously good. Connor took his game to another level. And so even without great pieces, schematically, they found ways to have success. And I think that's where I find encouragement.
Yeah, absolutely. And the stuff that they did in the run game was, I thought, kind of what the Lions want to get back to. It seems like Dan has kind of been hinting at going back to some of the things they did early, whether it's training camp practices or, he kind of hinted at that at the end of the year presser. So I don't know if that's part of it. I had to dive into the numbers a little bit more. But in terms of, fixing the run game or what the Lions need as an OC, like, I really don't feel like they need a lot. And, like, everyone wanted McDaniel, and I totally get it. I get why you'd want him. He's one of the best schemers in the NFL, one of the best offensive minds. I totally understand it. I think, one, I don't know if he wanted to come here. Maybe having Dan as, the influence that he has on this offense maybe wasn't super appealing for an offensive coordinator like that, who really tailors his offenses to what he has. And maybe he wants to tinker without any meddling. So maybe that's part of it. The other thing I would say is, Dan probably wants to run this a certain way and probably doesn't think that it needs a scheme overhaul based on what they've shown in the past. Like, the biggest thing that we've all said since the season ended, you got to fix the offensive line. You need a new offensive coordinator, but you got to fix the offensive line first and foremost. So even when Dan took over, we liked some of the things that he did, like getting the ball to JMO more. The play action rate jumped 18th to 6th when Dan took over. Like, the core of what the offense is supposed to look like, you saw it more under Dan. But the biggest problem that entire stretch was the offensive line. And he had even more injuries to the offensive line than Morton had to deal with. And I think that kind of hindered some things. I think Dan could still be a good long-term play caller if he wanted to be. But he's bringing the guy that can present new ideas. It's fresh blood. It's an outside hire. It's not one of his buddies. It's like Bertie mentioned, it's not someone from the Sean Payton tree. He's bringing in a guy that has a history running under center, play action, downhill run scheme. And he thinks that that's what this offense needs based on this hire. And if he truly had a chance to bring McDaniel in and McDaniel was like, that's my number one choice, I'll come if you want me, and he said no, then I think that's a conversation about whether that was the right thing or not. But just based on the person he went with in Petzing, I think it makes a lot of sense on the surface. And, again, he's got to go out and do it. But with what he's going to bring to the table with some of his ideas and his history, and assuming Brad Holmes goes out and fixes the offensive line, I really don't think they're far off from becoming another elite offense like they were in 2024.
I'm with you, Colton. Go ahead, Jared.
Well, all right. Just really quick.
No, I'm with you on 2022, obviously being an important reference point for Campbell. I mean, he brought it up twice in the final week of the season, and how he sorry, you skipped there for a minute. Did I cut you off?
No.
You're good. I'll come back.
Okay. No, Campbell referenced 2022 and wanting to get back to the way they played football at the end of that season twice at the end of this season. Like, clearly he feels like they have morphed into a different team over the past couple of years. This year, obviously, in particular. And he was like, yes, we have more talent, but are we the same team we were in 2022 at the end of that year? You got to start asking yourselves that question. And if not, why? What is it about that? And I go back to the way he talked about the Cardinals offense before the Lions played the Cardinals last year. I know you referenced some of his quotes, Colton. He also raved about like the multiplicity of their run game and how they could get you in so many ways, but how at the core of it, it was, and these are his words, an in your face, downhill scheme, and it was big boy ball. And I don't think that Dan Campbell would tell you, in all honesty, that the Lions could claim to play football that way this year. And I think it really grinded on him by the end of the year. And again, first and foremost, you have to restore the offensive line to fix this, but you also need a coordinator who is committed to instilling that sort of football into his offense. And I feel like Petzing is and or can be that guy. The other quote that stood out to me from last year before that game, and I get it, coaches always talk up the opponent in the lead up to the game, but these felt like sincere comments, was Aaron Glenn, when asked about the Cardinals offense, went right to Petzing and was like, this guy does a really, really good job of, in passing situations, continuing to run the ball and forcing defenses to play true. That was another signature of Ben Johnson over 2023 and 2024. And Glenn went on to say, like, this is not an offense where you can just say, all right, we're putting in our pass defense in an obvious passing down, because they'll gut you by running the ball in those situations because they feel that good about their run game. And, I think those are hallmarks of what the Lions did so well for 2 years, 2.5 years, really going back to the midway point of 2022. And from 2022, November 1st, 2022 to the end of 2024, the Lions were tied with the Chiefs for the best record in the NFL because, in my opinion, they owned the trenches on both sides of the ball. And that's the team that Campbell wants to reprise. That's the football that he wants to get back to. And I think it's the biggest reason why Petzing is here. Now, defensively, that's a whole different question.